This is the most unbelievable LPVO I've ever shot. This here is one of the most anticipated and interesting optical introductions of the year. This is Vortex's AMG 1-10 by 24. There's been a lot of speculation and talk about this LPVO, and one of the things that has really caught people's eye is the eye-popping price on this thing, and it is spendy. And so the real question is, why does this thing cost $4,000, and is it worth it? So anyway, I'm going to give you the quick answer, which is I think yes. And there's a lot of details to look at under the hood here that kind of will I think bear that out. Now, the story behind this is Vortex designed this specifically for the British Ministry of Defense, for a specific British Special Forces unit that had a set of requirements for an optic that were really demanding. And the result was this 1-10 that you see here. Vortex has satisfied that military requirement, and it's now being rolled out to the civilian commercial market, so we get to own these things too. But the gist of it is that they needed a really short 1-10, and they needed it to hit a certain weight limit and a very specific eye relief for the type of weapon system that they were mounting it on. They haven't really disclosed or publicly talked about what that was exactly, but without getting into too much detail, you can imagine that on the rifles that they are running, there is a limited amount of space to add accessories like thermals or whatever, and so having a compact form factor that allows for optimizing the space up front in the rail was kind of critical. And really, so much of what makes this scope remarkable, and it really is remarkable. I mean, Vortex has kind of pushed themselves and by extension the optics industry into uncharted territory with this. What those demands required was absolutely extraordinary. And a good place to kind of start with is comparing this to another 1-10 here, and this is Vortex's Gen 3 HD Vortex. This is a 1-10 as well, and you can see, looking at this, that the size difference is notable between these two. And what's important about that is that when you go to create an optic, you've only got so much running room in there, and the first place to kind of look is the erector tube, and that is a little segment that lives inside the middle of the scope there, and it holds the two lens cells at either end. And those lens cells, depending on where you have your magnification set, move in and out in relation to each other. And if you have a longer scope with a less demanding magnification range, it's relatively simple to kind of have that system work. But when you get this short and you have a 10x magnification range, man, things get really tricky. On top of that, Vortex constructed this that with the 1-10 throw lever is through a 120-degree throw, not 180 degrees. That also adds complexity into that system. And we're going to get into kind of the weeds here, so bear with me. To get this system to work, Vortex had to construct this to hold unbelievably tight tolerances. In that erector tube, if those lens cells are tilted even just the slightest amount, it's going to send the light that goes through the system sort of off kilter, and you're going to get just horrific results in terms of the optical quality. So holding tight tolerances is key. Now, if you hand load or if you're used to machining, you kind of talk about things like in thousandths. We're going to hold this into a thousandth of an inch. Sometimes maybe even like a 10,000th or half a 10,000th. I mean, crazy tolerances. Well, this scope takes that another level up. They're holding tolerances on elements of this down to 5 microns. Now, a micron is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. So within a millimeter, there are 1,000 microns. So 5 microns is what we call very, very small. In fact, it's so small that it is kind of by point of contrast, a red blood cell is 12 microns across. So the tolerances they're holding in this are smaller than a red blood cell. Now, to control for that, right, you can imagine you need really precise machinery tooling. You have to control even the temperature of what it is you're machining because of thermal expansion. But more than that, you have to control the temperature of what's doing the cutting. But more than that, you have to control the temperature of the floor that the machinery is sitting on, because even a swing of a couple of degrees can throw that 5 micron threshold, that tolerance, it can throw it out of whack. So Vortex had to construct this very specific facility and machinery to be able to do this. That's part of the story about why this scope costs what it does. Another portion of it is the lenses that they're using in there. There are, roughly speaking, 2 types of lenses in the world. There are spherical lenses and aspherical lenses. Spherical lenses are kind of what they sound like. They're a sort of a continuous, smooth arc that, or concave surface that is machined into the or formed onto the glass. Aspherical lenses are not that. They have multiple radii across their surfaces. That allows an aspheric lens can then do the job of what would take multiple lenses put together, spherical lenses put together. So they are more efficient that way, but they are a lot more expensive, about 4 times more expensive. And the creation of them is really tricky, because you have to have a specific built form for them, and they are compressed. And if you have that form at all wrong, at all out of spec, guess what? That lens is worthless. And those forms cost hundreds of thousands of dollars each to make. So there's a lot riding on that, that manufacturing process. In fact, it's so tricky that when Vortex went out to different partners, lens makers around the world, to help with some of those elements in this scope, they got a bunch of what they called no quotes, that these companies wouldn't do it at any price. Like, forget like the ridiculous price. They're just like, we're out. And so Vortex had to take some of that stuff in-house and sort of take on that burden themselves. So that's another major reason why this scope costs what it does. But what they've ended up with is just unbelievable optical clarity and brightness in this. I mean, this thing is a joy to look through. But they had to really take a big risk in terms of spooling this thing up to even make that possible. Now, the turrets on this are also costly. So when you think about how you adjust the reticle in a scope, you move the elevation and windage mechanisms And those are essentially, screws with clicks that push against that erector tube, that little erector tube that's in there. Now, to move the reticle a given amount, these are MOA or mils or angular units of measure. You think about that erector tube kind of being like a lever arm. Well, if it's a longer tube and a longer scope, each of those clicks that's pushing on that tube can be a little bit bigger, be a little bit more forgiving. Because this guy is short, the thread pitch on those turrets is extraordinarily fine. So for example, where on a precision scope like the Vortex Gen 3 HD, like my 6-36 I have, I think each click in there moves the adjusted about 20 microns. Well, on this thing, again, we're back down to that 5 micron level per click. So being able to hold that kind of tolerance in the turret and have the scope track well is really, again, just another kind of incredible engineering feat. So there's cost built into that. Now, this is kind of a cool little thing. Even the scope tube itself is costly. Check this out. I don't know if you can see these little detents in there, but those are little weight-saving cuts that have been machined into this. The form factor on this was meant to be as light as possible, and one place that they identified where they could get some weight out of was that space in there. On a typical scope, that area between these turrets is rounded off. Round is easy to make. Round is efficient. It doesn't cost as much, and all kinds of machines are set up to machine things in a round profile. Well, to make these cuts, Vortex had to invest in brand new machinery, which is super expensive, a whole other process to kind of dig that out. Now, they're saving about 0.6 ounces on this, which actually is a meaningful amount. But the other thing is it's kind of like a little bit of a visual flex as well. These cuts are going to be sort of a signature look on these AMG scopes going forward. And it's, I think, a little bit of a way that Vortex is kind of, thumping its chest a little bit and showing the rest of the optics industry, other makers out there, kind of they've upped their game, and it's sort of I think a kind of a tacit challenge to those guys as well. So anyway, the scope tube is one of the most expensive parts of this scope to manufacture, and those little cuts in there, they might not look like much at first, but that's a big reason why. So we've talked a fair bit about kind of the manufacturing process and the costs involved with that. But the thing that's really cool about this scope are the refinements that you find in it. Take these turrets, for example. These are toolless turrets, and you can see in there that you've got this center knob that you can undo, and actually you can kind of unscrew this thing by hand, which is one thing I really like. They really thought through the ergonomics on this scope beautifully. And the advantage of this, just bear with me while I undo that. Check this out. I've got this scope zeroed, but you can see that there's a little zero mark down there. This has a dual turret system, so I can set up a second zero on that by hand. You saw me just do it. And the advantage of that is that for this type of optic, remember, this is designed for CQB type, military operations, and there's a good chance if weapon platform is going to run different types of ammo, like supersonic and subsonic, those are going to have different zeros. And this dual ring system here allows you to set, a main zero and then a secondary zero, so that if you have to swap out ammunition, you can, quickly dial between those two settings. So that kind of refinement in the toolless turret is really nice. Another kind of cool feature, very thoughtful feature in terms of the ergonomics and function of this, is this little shark fin throw lever. Now, you might not think that that's very much, but the thing that's kind of neat about that is that this is angled, so if you're, you know, if this optic and rifle is in a sort of a battle situation, an operational situation, if you jam that into something, the leading edge of that is going to help deflect the force off of the scope. So it's actually kind of a little protective element in there, but this thing is still tall enough and gives enough purchase that it's easy to manipulate and dial that through the you know, through the magnification setting to whatever it is you need. I also like it in that it's low profile enough so that whatever other mounting system or accessories you have, this thing is going to clear it. Now, moving right behind that, you can see this has a locking fast focus diopter. You know, that's really nice as opposed to the European system back there that is very handy but can get knocked off easily. That has that locking diopter back there. That is another really nice refinement. One thing you can kind of see, and this is cool, is these index marks on the sides of the scope. Those were done for the military customer, right? Because when you're mounting a bunch of optics on a bunch of weapon platforms, you know, being able to kind of set it once and then repeat that process easily, you know, those index marks allow you to do that. From the sort of the regular kind of individual user standpoint, you're not necessarily going to be obviously mounting a bunch of these, but what that does is, because those are even on either side of the tube, those etched marks, it allows you to level your reticle within your mount. So all you have to do is line up that index mark with the you know, segment where the rings join each other, and voila, your reticle is now level. Again, it's thoughtful ergonomic touches like these that are kind of part of this scope's DNA too. The profile of this, you know, if you look through the ocular here, it is very thin and low profile. So when you have this thing dialed back to 1x, and it's a true 1x, and you look through this, that scope just kind of disappears. There's nothing blocking your vision. So you've got two eyes open on 1x with this, and you have a remarkably clear field of view. So that's an important thing as well in terms of how this thing performs in a practical sense. So one of the things that this scope accomplishes is that it is a true 1x magnification. So with both eyes open, you have a great field of view. In terms of target acquisition, it is illuminated. It has 11 total illumination levels that increase in brightness with an intermediate off in between each. The first two are actually night vision settings, you know, for that use. But you can see at the brightest setting, that thing is just blazingly bright, which is fantastic for working in really bright conditions. Now, as you zoom in, you can see the Christmas tree style reticle there. The horizontal stadia has bold hash marks in sort of 2 mil intervals, and they're indicated by the numbers 2, 4, 6, and 8. And for the on the vertical side, you can see it has a Christmas tree design, again with strong hash marks on that vertical stadia, that vertical crosshair. But then it has all of those wind dots and holdover dots in sort of 1 mil intervals. So with this thing cranked up to 10x and on an accurate rifle, you're actually able to do a lot of impressive long-range work with this. So this is an incredibly versatile scope this way. And like many kind of sort of military-oriented reticles, it has a ranging grid up top there. You can see that it has some horizontal hash marks and that there's a bottom reference mark. The horizontal hash marks are designed to bracket the shoulder of a person, and you know, depending on where they fill that in, you can see the yardage in hundreds of yards there based on the numbers, the 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can also hold the bottom portion of the grid at the feet of the target, and wherever they fit in terms of the top of the head, it's the same thing. That's the range to them. So, you know, this scope, the whole idea of a good LPVO is it packs in a heck of a lot of utility from 1x up to 10x, and you know, there's a lot of missions that this thing is capable of handling. Now, one of the things you can probably ascertain from what I've been talking about is that everything on this scope is basically unique. I think there are only a couple of tiny, like little screws or something that are any kind of a carryover product from any of Vortex's other optics. So this thing is, you know, kind of built from the ground up. They had to design all of these very specific bits and pieces of this to solve various problems. You know, for example, the illumination dial here, it's got a big beefy O-ring in there that they had to put in, you know, to help with the durability of this. This thing is rated to be waterproof down to 10 meters for 2 hours, an incredibly sort of demanding threshold for that. It is shockproof and sort of, you know, hardened for you know, kind of combat operations. They constructed a recoil simulator specifically for this project that they can actually tune to give an impulse, you know, the force of the impulse, the duration of it, that mimics specific cartridges and weapon systems. For example, a 308 SCAR, they could and have a specific setting that mimics that, or a 5.56 M4 or a 50 cal. They put this scope through all of those types of weapon systems to make sure that it can withstand the impacts from recoil. That machine can also be tuned to mimic the specific jostling that you'll have with different vehicles, different types of trucks, for example, or other military vehicles. Again, they kind of left no stone unturned to harden this system and make sure that it performed up to the standards that were required by the British Special Forces. So the thing is shockproof. They did a bunch of drop testing with this thing from different heights on different surfaces. This thing is just you know, hard as nails. So getting this as delicate an optical system, as challenging an optical system to be that durable, that's also part of what explains the cost in this. They had to sort of cement in certain lens elements in there, but while still allowing them to take pieces of this apart for service if they need to. They have you know, special ball bearings that they've incorporated into the focus ring and thing, again, to keep it smooth and to help it resist impacts. They even had to design a special spring to bear against that erector tube. Again, I keep coming back to the erector tube. There's so much of the technology and complexity of this scope is incorporated into that. They had to design a special spring in there with sufficient force because it's so tiny, so that when the elevation and windage knobs kind of bear against it, that it has enough support in there to you know, to do what it needs to do. So every little piece of this, you know, was basically built up from scratch. And you know, what they've ended up with is this incredibly ergonomic and high performing optic. One thing that's kind of worth noting is that anybody who spends a fair bit of time behind this glass is going to notice that the reticle itself, especially when you crank it up to higher levels of magnifications, the edges of those reticles are kind of a little, almost like slightly fuzzy, slightly gray. And you know, the question is why? Why is that happening? I have no doubt that some of the optics experts out on the internet are gonna cry foul and say that this is a sign of you know, poor optical quality or something like that. But it's not that. What that is because of the demands put on the very nature of kind of light, the aggressiveness with which Vortex, this scope has to bend the light to kind of do what it does in this short in this short form factor, that the light is being, manipulated so aggressively that you're going to get that that slightly less crisp thing right around the reticle itself. The image quality is still incredible. I mean, if you look kind of downrange and past that, everything is bright and sharp and clear. But because of just the challenges physically of bending the light that hard, you're going to get that slightly kind of grayish tinge, that grayish edge on the reticle. It's super subtle, and it's not, from an operational standpoint, makes absolutely zero difference in the function of the rifle, of the optic. It has no negative impact on what this scope does. But I can already imagine some people sort of kind of pointing that out and maybe complaining about it, or having it be sort of like an aha thing. So, those are the guts of how this thing works. Now, is there any kind of downside to it? Well, there's the cost. I mean, this thing still is a pile of money, I mean, it's not going to be attainable for a lot of folks there, but my God, it's a great optic. The other thing is that it's so short that there's not a lot of forgiveness in the mounting system here. So you can see, like, for at least the offset AR type mounts that I have, none of them would actually work with this because there's not enough real estate on that on the scope to do that. So I've got this straight up mount which works just fine, but that is another thing. It's not too much of a good thing, but it's so short that you're going to have to kind of sort of think about the what kind of mounts that you use on this. But other than that, I mean, really, you got to give a lot of credit to Vortex for this introduction. This 1-10 is a phenomenal scope, unbelievable optical quality. It sets a new standard, certainly in the LPVO market, and you can imagine that this isn't going to be the only AMG product that we're going to see. So, looking down the road, don't be surprised when you see sort of higher magnification ranges offered with this basic kind of platform. But for a traditional non-electro-optic scope, this thing sets a new standard. It's a new high water mark in terms of engineering, and Vortex has really sort of upped their game, and it's a big challenge to the entire optics industry. And I think that in terms of the price, when you really get into the details of what this scope consists of, it makes sense to me that it costs what it does. Is it going to be attainable for everybody? No, but my God, if you've got the money and you've got the desire to have sort of the coolest new LPVO ever made, then this AMG is going to be for you.